The Cursed provides a fresh take on a classic monster concept, but whether you like it or not, I think will depend on what you want out of a horror movie. Stick around and I'll share my thoughts. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Here's another one of my uncut reviews, this time of The Cursed. The synopsis on IMDb reads, in rural 19th century France, a mysterious, possibly supernatural menace threatens a small village. John McBride, a pathologist, comes to town to investigate the danger and exorcise some of his own demons in the process. All right, so I would describe this as a monster movie where it has that structure where the danger is mostly unseen and unknown, and the monster's kind of unveiled over time, which I really like that structure. I don't think I ever get, as long as the concept ends up being interesting, I don't think I ever get bored of that kind of structure to a monster movie, the slow unveiling of the monster over time. The monster concept is strongly hinted at early on, which is likely, I think, going to lead horror fans to say, oh, it's just a blank movie. But they keep the monster hidden visually through most of the movie, slowly revealing its nature and what it looks like and its lore over time. And when it's eventually seen more fully, it actually only bears partial resemblance to the classic monster concept it's based on, which I won't spoil. If it would have been just a blank movie, I would have lost interest. But it surrounds the core monster concept with lore and a curse that fleshes it out in interesting ways. It also blends elements of the supernatural, such as the curse referred to in the title, with biological elements, grounding it in the material a bit, like the pathologist examining the creature's blood under a very early kind of primitive microscope, and scenes involving monster gore with practical and therefore very tangible feeling effects. So it all adds up to an experience I did not find scary or even very tense that I ever recall, but definitely interesting enough to be worth a one-time viewing. As far as the cast goes, it's made up of some vaguely familiar faces, but no names I recognize. I thought, though, that they all did a solid job of representing both the normal emotions and intense emotions that are needed for a horror movie, but otherwise the performances didn't especially stand out from other movies of this type. As far as the stunts and visuals, there are some solid practical monster gore effects that I really appreciated because my eye is just cursed to pick out CGI and looks like they see it like cartoons. And the practical effects, the way they use them in this movie, reminded me a bit of the autopsy scene in John Carpenter's The Thing. But many other effects are digital, and not of the highest quality either. So I would say that they weren't so rough or inexpensive looking that they ruined the experience for me, but fake looking enough that I didn't feel the creepiness of them that I think I should have, or that I would want to feel. The practical effects, although they were happening during less intense or fast-paced, action-y type moments, still felt, and they felt a little unsettling and genuinely. But the digital effects, I guess they looked cool mainly because of the concept that they were representing was kind of neat in my mind. But other than that, they just kind of came and went without making me really feel their reality in remotely the same way as the practical effects. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, the curse is brought on by a gypsy who has been victimized by British landowners. The gypsy seems to believe, just based on this scene where she's praying early on, seems to believe in some distorted, highly superstitious version of Christianity, or perhaps some entirely different and pagan belief system that contains some trappings of Catholicism. So thematically, it's not a clean divide. It's not a clean case of pagan good, Christian bad, which is often the case in other stories involving victimized witches that we're meant to, feel sorry for and empathize with. The Bible is significantly referenced a few times, and core plot elements even hang on biblical passages in this movie. The silver teeth seen in the trailer and that lie at the center of the curse are supposedly made of the very silver Judas was paid to betray Jesus. But despite the biblical reference in that, this concept is very unbiblical, very superstitious, as the silver Judas received was not said to bear any curse or particular power. It also seems highly unlikely that the silver which Judas ultimately threw to the floor in the temple, that was the last appearance that I think we see in Scripture of the silver. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But anyway, it seems highly unlikely, given where we last see the silver in the scriptural account, that it would have remained all the pieces collected together and have found its way to this traveling band of gypsies nearly 2,000 years later. The more interesting and arguably appropriate scriptural reference is Ezekiel 22:22. In the ESV, that reads, "As silver is melted in a furnace, so you shall be melted in the midst of it, and you shall know that I am the Lord. I have poured out my wrath upon you." Now, this verse was quoted in this movie to suggest that the curse they're dealing with that's attached to the silver teeth was God's way of pouring out wrath on this community for how their leaders victimized the gypsies. Now, Ezekiel 22:22 was directed at Israel thousands of years before this story takes place. So to treat it like some prophecy that could apply to these people in England is to treat Scripture as though it is so mysterious. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of mystery throughout Scripture. But this kind of treatment treats it as though it is so mysterious that it's anybody's guess what any of it means, you know? And this treatment of scriptural interpretation, especially of the prophetic or apocalyptic literature in Scripture, is unfortunately common among some Christian traditions that do not encourage the average church member to read, study, and learn to understand the Bible for themselves in its cultural, linguistic, genre, context, all those things. However, even for more Bible-oriented Christians, passages like Ezekiel chapter 22 can be applied in principle to situations far removed from the original and primary intent of the author, which I could almost imagine being the case here. I say that because the surrounding context of Ezekiel 22:22, which is not quoted in the movie, only that one verse is quoted, but the surrounding context involves God judging Israel for, among other things, having leaders who mistreat the foreigners among them, which is exactly the premise at the start of this movie. Ezekiel 22 shouldn't have led the leaders in this movie to assume it referred directly to their situation, as though it was written about their situation. An easy look at the context, even on a surface reading, should be able to tell you that that's not the case. But they could have learned from that passage that God is angry when leaders mistreat foreigners, and that God's people should expect potential discipline from God if they choose to engage in that. So, while not entirely the way I'd like to see Scripture handled in movies like this, it's still less reckless and far-fetched in its use and application compared to many other supernatural horror movies that quote the Bible. And I think it offers a great springboard for some worthwhile thought. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, it's not a must-watch movie. Rent it cheap. Not more than $2 to $3, whether that's Redbox or, cheap rental on a streaming service, something like that. Don't expect to be scared or on the edge of your seat ever, but it's an interesting horror movie with a fresh concept that will be worth giving an evening to at some point. This one's rated R for strong violence, grisly images, and brief nudity. The Parents Guide on IMDb.com is helpful, I think, for this movie to get a better idea of what's going on there. But anyway, those are all of my thoughts for now on The Cursed. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected, do whatever you'd like to do within legal bounds to help propel summer insanity, which is coming. You can see the link in the description below for more information. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get more info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/spiritblade productions. Then I hope you will check out the Christian Geek Central podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
Do you like games? I like games. Do you like games too? I like games too. I like games too.